all of you have probably now seen and participated or organized a lot of online webinars. Zoom is just a different tool to also do it. How we communicate via Zoom is quite easy. If you have questions, you can just type it into the chat. You find the chat on the bar at the bottom, where you can just send your questions or comments to all of us or to specific people. For example, if you have technical questions, please, you can always send these to me in the chat or to my colleague Silvia Nani, who will also be there to help you with it. You can also use these symbols if you want to agree or want to speak or have a question. Then please just use the chat to do so, because in general we would encourage you to mute yourself when you're not speaking, because it makes it easier for everyone to understand. Later we will have some kind of interactive sessions. They're called breakout sessions. Maybe you've heard of them. It's basically the equivalent to workshop tables, where I will group you in smaller groups to discuss some questions that we have prepared for you, but I will get to that in a second as well. And now, before we come to the agenda and the introduction of the project, I would like to ask you some questions. Just two very short questions, because we are of course interested to get to know you at least a little bit via this online version of a workshop. So I'd like you to answer this this short survey that you should see now on your screens, so that we know at least a little bit who is here with us today. I can see that now half of you has answered already. I will give it just a few seconds for the others to answer as well, because we would like to know if you're representing today a municipality, city or region, an NGO, academia, an energy agency, or maybe the financing sector. So some of you are still responding. And I think most of you have responded by now, so I will end it. And now you should see the results. So 1/3 here represents an NGO. Okay, that's very interesting. Then we have a few municipalities and cities here. We have people from academia. We have a lot of people, 8 representing an energy agency, and even 2 people representing the financing sector. Okay, so I think that's quite interesting. So you can see that. Okay, thank you. Then just another question for you. Score about the project and the CSOP. The CSOP is the financing model that will be presented to you in a second. So we would like to know, how familiar are you with the SCORE project and or the CSOP financing model? Either you're an absolute newcomer to the project, but maybe you've heard of it before. You do not feel like an expert, but you have heard about it a little bit. Then you're well acquainted with the project, and maybe you even know everything about SCORE. We do have some project partners here, so I hope some people will answer this question, of course. Okay. So most of you have answered the question. Let's see. Okay, so I think you should see that half of you are absolute newcomers to the projects. That's good to hear, so I hope you will learn a lot. Some of you have heard about it, some of you are well acquainted with it. Okay, I'm sure we can still find some details that will be new to you. And some of you know everything about SCORE. I guess these are the project partners. Then Thank you so much for taking the time to introduce yourself a little bit to us. And now we will go on with the webinar, and I will give the word to my colleague Kirsten Röber of Caritas. She will present to you the agenda. Thank you, Kirsten. Hello?
Moment. Okay, now it works. Everybody can see me and hear me, I hope.
Yes.
Yes, okay. Yeah, thank you for joining the webinar, and a very warm welcome also from my side and on behalf of Caritas Germany, and on behalf of our nationwide project, the Stromsparcheck, the energy saving service or energy saving check. You see the poster behind me, and this probably answers your question why a welfare organization like Caritas is involved in a project like SCORE dealing with renewable energies. Yeah, I would like to present to you now the agenda of today's webinar. So if Marie, maybe you can show the next slide. Yeah, it's there. Thank you. So today we have two parts to show, to present, and to discuss. The first is a general introduction into the CSOP model presented by Professor Lovic from the European University of Viadrina, who's also the creator of the project. And in the second talk, there is Kai Lipsius from the Green Capital City Essen, who will give us an insight in the CSOP in action. And like Marie already mentioned, there's a breakout session, and she will guide us through this breakout session. It gives us more room for participation, more room for your inputs. And we will have, after this, we will have a 5 minutes break. We will start the second part of inclusion by my talk about inclusion of vulnerable consumers in the energy transition, followed by Professor Lovic with his talk about the assisted CSOP. We will later hear more about it, what's behind this, this term. And we will conclude the presentations with Florian Hanke's contribution about the best practices, local cooperation for inclusive financing. At the end, hopefully there's sufficient time to answer your questions and to discuss a bit the CSOP and also the inclusion topic. And of course, we will conclude, this is then Marie's part again. If you are interested in this model and you would like to get in contact with us, she will provide you with further information. And now some, just a very, very short introduction into SCORE. We are Horizon 2020 project, which is funded by the European Union and which has started in April 2018. We are about 14 partners out of 5 countries. And the objective of SCORE is to facilitate consumers becoming co-owners of renewable energies. And this is tested now in 3 pilots The CSOP model is tested in 3 pilots in the Czech Republic and the town Litomerice, in Italy, in Val di Susa, and in Germany, our new pilot, Essen. And yeah, now I would like to hand over to Professor Lovic, who will give us a further introduction into the SCORE project and especially to the CSOP, which is the core of our whole webinar. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kirsten. I'll share my screen with you, and you should actually see my screen now.
Yes.
Does it work?
Yeah.
Very well. So what I would like to do in the next 15 minutes is give you a quick overview of the financing method behind SCORE, that is the so-called consumer stock ownership plan. And I will start with a very brief introduction into the background at the European level, which refers to new legislation that has been recently passed roughly a year ago at the supranational level, and that has to be transposed into national legislation until June 2021, which is already next year, roughly in 1 year. Then I'll quickly give you an overview of the challenges and go a little bit more into detail of the financing technique of the so-called consumer stock ownership plan, and especially stress why it is inclusive. To start, what is the challenge that Europe, but not only Europe, but the world is faced at the moment? I call this the energy systems of tomorrow. So we are witnessing a transition from fossil fuels to renewable fuels, and this, of course, means that not only our energy systems, but also our society changes. And what you see here on the slide is a picture that illustrates the difference, or these new energy systems, where you will have microgrids on the one hand side. You will have very different actors, like individuals or enterprises, farmers, municipalities, which are now becoming what is called active consumers. So they're not only consuming energy, but they are also transformed into producers of energy, and that is, they become prosumers. So in the energy systems of the future, the old roles are changing, and the consumer is not only consuming, but also producing, not only for his own consumption, but also to share it with others or to feed it into the grid. We see that there are various types of energy, various types of renewables. We will also see flexibility measures, which are discussed now very much, so battery storage. And of course, all these energy flows are bidirectional. That means that there is an exchange of energy between the main grids and smaller grids. There are bidirectional energy flows between the actors, between the prosumers, within mini microgrids, but also over the main grids. And this setting has three sides, which I will briefly touch upon. The first one that you see here is, of course, structure. So it's about architecture. This is engineering. So the question is, how will these energy systems of tomorrow look like in terms of the architecture, in terms of the engineering? So what are the technical challenges that these energy systems need to comply with? But that is only one aspect. What is equally important is the question of governance. So how will these energy systems be, what kind of rules will apply to these energy systems, and how will on the one hand side burdens, but on the other hand side also profits be allocated to the participants in these new markets, in these new energy systems? And that is what actually the Renewable Energy Directive, the recast of the Renewable Energy Directive, is regulating. And that is what I mentioned a moment before, which is the hard piece of the new legislative framework for the energy union, which was passed in late 2018, beginning of 2019, and complemented by the renewable internal electricity market directive. So these two directives, as the so-called clean energy package, together with a number of other directives, are setting these rules. Now, the third aspect that I will be focusing on in my short talk is the question of transaction. So what will the contractual arrangements look like between the partners in these energy systems, and what kind of business models will we see in the future emerging in order to enable these critical functions of these systems? A few words of background concerning the clean energy package. The lead theme of the European Commission is to put consumers at the heart of the energy markets. And of course, one may ask oneself, is this just a slogan or is it really a program? And we were very much surprised to see that the new regulation actually is very robust and is very sound, and it does actually really put the consumers at the heart of the energy market. It can be characterized actually as a small revolution, because it not only introduces new categories of actors, which is the so-called prosumer, so the self-consumer that produces not only for self-consumption but also for sell to the grid. As I mentioned, it sees three forms of prosumption. One is individually, that would be, for example, a PV installation on the rooftop, but we also see a definition for jointly acting self-consumers. That could be in tenant electricity projects, for example. And finally, which I'm focusing on today, is we see the emergence of renewable energy communities, that is collectively organized self-consumers that together in a renewable energy community produce and consume renewable energy. There's a third form, which are so-called citizen energy communities, but we will not go into this topic today. These are similar energy communities, but they are not focusing on renewables, but on other types of renewable energy, of energy resources. The second aspect, which is revolutionary in terms of the innovation, is that this package of legislation introduces energy and electricity sharing within these energy communities. So the members of the communities can share energy and electricity between each other, sell it or share it for free. And last but not least, and this is equally important as we will see in a moment, it introduces a new model for the control and ownership of these renewable energy communities, which, however, is not compulsory. So in order to qualify as such a renewable energy community, there are two criteria. One, that the energy community has to be effectively controlled by its members or its members or shareholders that are in the proximity of these projects, so the local partners. So it cannot be controlled by, for example, big energy companies. Secondly, the renewable energy community has to be autonomous from individual shareholders, so none of the shareholders or members can control it. So there is a limit of 33% of shareholding, which means that, for example, a project which would be entirely led by a municipality and owned 100% by the municipality would not qualify as a renewable energy community. And that being said, it is important that these renewable energy communities will have a heterogeneous membership. Now, what are the benefits of qualifying as a renewable energy community? The benefits are, one, that you actually may benefit from electricity sharing, and two, that there is a so-called enabling framework which will help these renewable energy communities to be founded and to operate, so they will benefit from preferential conditions on the markets. I will not go into any of the details here, but I just want to say that what I mentioned about the heterogeneity of having various different co-investors under the roof of one renewable energy community one renewable energy community can be characterized as the biggest challenge, because the existing business models that we already know in the renewable energy sector face a number of problems, and that they have not been made for this heterogeneity. So usually, if you think of individual ownership, it's the family that has a photovoltaic installation on the rooftop. But if we think of collective models, the one best known in Germany, but also in other countries, is the renewable energy cooperative. So the renewable energy cooperative was primarily made to organize individuals, private consumers, but it was not made to be combined with, for example, SMEs, small and medium-sized enterprises, or with municipalities. And that is actually where the CSOP as a trustee model provides innovation. And I will exemplify this with this animated chart here. So in the traditional models that we know, the traditional business models, consumers, be it individually or be it collectively, would invest in a renewable energy plant, and they would either do this directly or, as I said, using a cooperative. What is different with the CSOP is that the CSOP employs not necessarily a cooperative. It may involve a cooperative, but what it does is it uses an operating company, as I said, in different forms, but the shareholding or the participation of the individual consumers is not directly in this corporate vehicle, be it a limited liability company or a cooperative, but there is a trusteeship involved, which means that the consumers are represented by a trustee. And that also, on the one hand side, and this means that the trustee will consult these consumers in the decision-making processes also as shareholders, but it also means that for the other partners of the project, which are co-investors in this operating company, that they will not have to directly interact with 200 families, but that there is one telephone number, there's one interlocutor, one professional representative who sits on the board together with them of this operating company, which of course professionalizes the decision-making processes. The second characteristic of the CSOP, which makes it different from other concepts, is that it involves leverage. It can borrow money. And this means that we are using the borrowing power of the corporate entity of this operating company to finance the participation of consumers or micro enterprises which may not have the savings or may not have access to credit. So instead of using, let's say, 200 microcredits in order to invest in the operating company, it is the operating company itself that takes on a long-term investment loan in order to facilitate the participation of individual shareholders and pledges the shares or the assets of this operating company in order to secure the loan on behalf of the consumers. The next element is the key element with regard to heterogeneity, and that is that in this setting, municipalities or commercial investors can co-invest in the operating company. And as I mentioned beforehand, this depends a lot on national legislation. So in some countries, cooperative law is very progressive and flexible, namely in Italy, where we're implementing one of our pilot projects. And it already allows the participation of or the direct participation of municipalities or investors without any obstacles. In other countries where cooperative law is a little bit more traditional or inflexible, there are obstacles. This doesn't mean that municipalities and investors cannot invest in cooperatives, but there are downsides for them. One for the investors is if the operating company were a cooperative, that the voting rights would not be as in a corporation, a business corporation, proportional to their shareholding, but in a cooperative, usually you have the principle of one member, one vote. And if you imagine you are a small and medium-sized enterprise and you buy into such a project with 10%, then usually you expect to have 10% of the voting rights. So this is usually an obstacle for commercial investors to invest. But there's another problem for municipalities if this were again, as I said, if this were a cooperative, in many countries, the cooperative law foresees that it's the General Assembly that elects the members of the board. So there's no guarantee that the representative of the municipality is on the executive board of the operating company, and that can be an important obstacle. Obviously, there are mechanisms to get around this, but usually, from our experience with municipalities, this is an obstacle where the legal advisor of the mayor says, well, we will support such a project, but we won't directly invest in it. And that's what is different if the operating company is, for example, a limited liability company. In other words, it is not a cooperative, but a corporation, or if cooperative law in the given country is flexible enough to allow for more innovative solutions. The next step is that the operating company with the long-term loan invests in the renewable energy plant, which then produces energy, supplies our participating consumers and also the micro enterprises that may be shareholders, so all the local partners. These, of course, still pay their monthly payments for energy, but in this case now to our operating company. And likewise, the operating company ideally also finances and implements energy efficiency measures in the building that hosts the plant. And the reason for this feature is that the aim is to increase energy efficiency, which in turn will decrease the self-consumption. And this enables our project to sell more revenues from excess production to the grid, which then can be used to pay off the bank loan that financed the acquisition of the shares on behalf of our consumers and the micro enterprises. So, in a nutshell, this is the CSOP financing mechanism, and I'll just quickly repeat the 4 key characteristics before I'll leave the floor. So the first unique selling point of the CSOP is that it is a low threshold investment, and this is especially important in our seminar today. So individuals that do not have savings and do not have access to capital credit can participate in this model because it is the corporation, the operating company, that takes on a bank loan. And this, of course, also means that there is no individual liability. So individual participants are not liable for their investment except for the value of the share. So let's say a family invests 200 euros, and this is financed by 50% by the bank loan. Then the overall liability is limited to these 200 euros. Once the bank credit is paid off, in general after 7 to 8 years, this also means that dividends will be paid to our consumer shareholders. So the CSOP provides them with a second income source. The second important characteristic is that it has low entry and exit costs for consumers, because if consumers are actually leaving the village and somebody else moves into their house and they want to leave the CSOP, it is easy to transfer the shares. It is only the party of the trusteeship agreement that changes. In Germany, these type of trusteeship agreements are already well known from the real estate sector of so-called Publikumsgesellschaften. So this is not something very exotic, but these kind of trusteeship arrangements have been around for the last 30 or 40 years across Europe in different forms. Of course, the CSOP has to be adapted to national legislation. The third unique selling point is that it protects consumers while professionalizing decision-making. This means, on the one hand side, that consumers are represented by a professional trustee, which means that even those consumers that may be, for example, working poor, or maybe pensioners, or maybe people who are not well educated and don't think that they can participate in such a project, have somebody that can consult them and advise them in decision making. On the other hand side, this also means for the other co-investors that they have a professional interlocutor. As I said, that there's one telephone number, that they don't have to interact with 200 families. And this is again something that we hear very often from our municipalities, that they say, well, we would like to involve the citizens, but dealing at the level of decision making with 200 individuals is very cumbersome and time consuming, and this is often keeping them away from such projects. And the last but not least characteristic is that this type of financing technique makes such investments also attractive for other co-investors, be it small and medium-sized enterprises, be it ESCOs, be it plant engineers. For example, somebody who builds a wind park may be in search of support for this project, and making the local citizens co-owners, of course, increases acceptance. So this is a flexible financing mechanism that enables also other investors, and that is at the heart of the new Renewable Energy Directive, as I pointed out. I would like to stop here and give the floor back to our moderators, and we will later hear a little bit more about the assisted CSOP, which will go more into the details of how to involve even vulnerable consumers who don't have the 100 or 200 euros to invest in such a normal CSOP project. But as I said, more about this later. Thank you very much for the moment.
Thank you, Professor Lovic. I don't see any questions right now in the chat. So maybe before we go into a short question section, I would ask Kai Lipsius of the city of Essen to present his short presentation where we will see the CSOP in action, since Essen is one of our pilots. So I would like to ask him to share his screen and to start his presentation. And after that, we will have about some minutes for question from your side. So if there's anything that's unclear for now, please start typing it in the chat if you feel like it. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Maria. Thank you very much. So even as a child, I wanted to be a pilot. So thank you very much that to SCORE that we have the possibility now. And obviously, we would have very much liked to have welcomed you to Essen today. But I'm all the more grateful that you took the time to then join us virtually to also hear about our journey. So I wanted to start with a little bit about Essen so that you can assess also the singularity, obviously, but also have the possibility to look at the adaptability for your cities as well in our journey. So Essen is a city in Germany, North Rhine-Westphalia, and it is part of this region Ruhr metropolis with 5 million inhabitants. Essen itself is also already a big city in German and European scales, with almost 600,000 inhabitants. And what's probably most important is our transformation process from being rural 150 years ago to then becoming a big urban conurbation and following the coal and steel development in the rural region, and then kind of back the transformation into being awarded European Green Capital in 2017. So again, to also illustrate this journey, especially the step from gray to green in 1910, the city was dominated by the steel manufactory from Krupp. And as already mentioned, we have become the European capital in 2017. So this sustainable transformation is the top priority for the city of Essen, and the SCORE project very much helps us in this way. Essen itself can be considered as a very strong economic center of the rural region, with some big trades, industry and energy companies having their headquarters here, and also quite impressive numbers looking at the gross domestic product and the number of jobs. This is the one side of the medal, but on the other hand, we are also still very much challenged by the downturn of the steel and mining industries. And this is also kind of goes along with a division throughout the city, with a rather poor north and a more rich south of the city. Overall, our unemployment rate is at 12%, and also very impressive numbers, in my impression at least, is that almost 1/3 of the children receive social welfare. So are families that needs some kind of support. So a matter of vulnerable customers, vulnerable prosumers is also very, very important for us. And also generally financing these kind of projects, because we have a very high municipal debt of 3.6 billion euros, which calculates to more than 6,000 euros per inhabitant on average. And also on the left-hand side, you can see that especially our poorer north is dominated by rented apartment blocks. So this shows the proportion of owner-occupied dwellings, with the dark green colors showing that the owner-occupied dwellings, mostly single family houses, can be mostly found in the richer south of the city. So this already shows you the kind of typical situation of rather economically challenged people living in apartment blocks as a typical situation. And also generally with the a known problem how to get, for example, PV installations on these bigger apartment blocks, because you don't have easily organized self-consumption. So having stated that we are European Green Capital, obviously we're also very proud of a couple of achievements, but there are also some areas where we rather lag behind in comparison to other cities, but more importantly also in comparison to our own targets. And this is namely especially also the build up of renewable energy sources. If you look at the picture on the left down corner, you can see that there is obviously some development. So we have seen some biomass installations, and we also see a constant rise in the number of solar energy installations. But we are not happy with the dynamics. And this is also shown on the right-hand side, where you can see that actually the number of new installations is not increasing, but rather even decreasing. And also, obviously, if you look at the typical type of solar energy installations, it's some public projects like shown on the left side, but mostly PV panels on private houses. Also importantly, obviously, as a starting point, we do have also an energy cooperative that financed a couple of the PV on schools as a starting point also, and as a very welcome experience of these kind of projects. But again, comparing it to our targets, you can see that we have still a long way to go in the sense of expansion and buildup of solar energy especially. So currently we only cover 1.3% of our consumption locally. And our stated goal is that we want to increase this to at least a third of the share. And also expecting from experience that we don't have a very strong a decrease in electricity consumption, but rather increasing uses with electrification, and what Professor Jenslovich explained about obviously this new types of systems that also rely a lot on electrification. So I think this shows quite well why we wanted to become a part of SCORE. And next slide shows you how we became a part of SCORE. First of all, we have to thank obviously Climate Alliance, because our first encounter with the project idea and with Jens was at the Climate Alliance International Conference in 2018, where we introduced the concept, and we immediately took fire, but it still obviously took a little bit of time in order to organize local action. And we became a follower city of SCORE. And as a follower city, we already received very helpful and very great support to develop the idea locally. And especially we had obviously some more knowledge put into the city administration itself, with a workshop in Frankfurt Oder from the SCORE project. but then we were also able to organize a meeting and with the support from SCORE. And I think it's very important to address the point that we already from the beginning tried to involve a lot of local stakeholders that are important for the implementation and that are generally possible partners of the CSOP model. This obviously is the municipal utilities, but also the housing companies. We have also tried to include our local energy experts from the university, also with the idea of already feeling forward this role of a trustee. We had local support from the Energy Agency from North Rhine-Westphalia, which is funded by the Ministry of Economics. Also, our energy saving service, which is the Essen brand of the Stromsparcheck, which is also part of SCORE with the Caritas. In our case, it's the Neue Arbeit of the Diakonie, so from the Evangelian Church, which is implementing the same idea very successfully. And also we have some societies, Essen municipal companies that concentrate on social services, who were very interested from the beginning, and a couple of other stakeholders. And I think Jens did a great job of convincing us about the values and the advantages of the approach. And this also led to a city council decision end of last year to also organize municipal funding for the whole idea of co-investments into renewable energies on in this case, especially public roofs. So we had a decision that for each kilowatt hour consumed, we put away a little bit of money into funding for reinvestment into renewable energies. So generally we have a procurement of only eco electricity, so renewable electricity, but now we also have the agreement that we need to reinvest to increase the number of local production as part of our municipal procurement. And then we had the opportunity to become a full SCORE partner as of February this year. And obviously this also helped us to intensify our journey and to speed up the process of actually qualifying specific pilot investments. And currently we are still in the stage of identifying the stakeholders and the role of the stakeholders within an implementation, and obviously also of the facilities where we have the perfect constellation for pilot projects. And I want to quickly introduce you two of those settings. The first one is concentrated on the group of vulnerable customers. That is also a specific interest of the city of Essen as well as of SCORE to also enable projects in this area. And our possible partner here is the Franz Sales Haus, which is also a daughter company of the Caritas. So they do a lot of work with people with disabilities. And especially they have one main campus site where there is assisted housing, where there are educational facilities, but also they have some interesting facilities in the sense of energy load curves, heat demand and electricity demand, running a bakery, a laundry, a couple of workshops, even a hotel. We also have an indoor pools for sports, for some courses. Again, most of them are being used mainly by the people with disabilities. And also there's a hotel being run as an inclusion company. And they already have a small PV installation on their roof, the so-called Hotel Franz. But again, this whole approach of the CSOP the integration of sites that are not that need to be connected using the public grid. So we also have a very interesting partner with the Gonzalez House, because overall they have 41 sites, and obviously we have a lot of screening and scoping work, in the sense of looking at the possible implementations, and you don't need to be able to read the numbers, but just to show you that we are collecting a lot of data about sites, sizes, about demand, about load curves, in order to within SCORE then find the best scenario for implementation. And our focus here is always on local renewable energy production, especially on rooftop photovoltaics. So this is the kind of fully a perfect scenario for a first pilot, but also a very special and a situation with this partner of the Franz-Sales House. And the second pilot, we are very much addressing the typical situation in Essen. So from the map in the middle of the this slide, you can see that we are in the north of Essen, in Essen-Vogelheim. And we have a lot of buildings by our municipal company, which are here within the red frames on the overview. And so the municipal company has a lot of apartment buildings here. And we have a big school, we have a kindergarten, which are shown on the pictures. And also the energy saving service has been quite active in this area, being able to give a lot of energy consultations for tenants. So again, this represents a very typical situation, and we obviously also want to show and have experience to introduce a CSOP in this kind of scenario. Because then obviously we have a very good chance of an adaptation and a rollout into a lot of places. And the idea here again is to put PV panels on schools, on kindergartens, but also on apartment buildings, and enable the customers to become prosumers. So this is the development from Essen, and thank you very much for listening, and I'm looking forward to also be able to answer some of your questions. Handing back over to Marie.
Okay, thanks a lot, Kai. Everybody, I saw that we had a comment from a consumer organization, one of our partners actually, saying that, of course, reiterating again the point that one consumer is sometimes maybe overloaded with this, with the participation, and can be represented professionally by these consumer organizations that may represent their wishes very well, and take some of the effort away from actually being an active energy citizen and being active in the energy transition as a prosumer. So thank you for this. Are there any more questions from your side to the financing model or the experiences so far from the city of Essen? Yes, Frau Potthoff, do you have a question?
Yes, I have a question to Kai Lipsius, because could you explain again this financial model you said in the first part of your little speech, how the refinancing aspect, how you wanted to deal with that?
Yeah, thank you for the question. So this is obviously one possibility in order to involve a municipality into the CSOP idea. And generally, we are very challenged in order to raise money, because as a very poor city, we are generally obliged to stick to obligatory tasks. And so we had this decision to also dedicate money especially to renewable energy investments. And so we are still in the process of figuring how this actually enables us to become part of a CSOP, because we don't yet have a running CSOP in Essen. But we already use this to find a way to also be able to calculate more reliable with funding that can be used for the municipal part of a membership in the CSOP, let's say. And the general idea is that we are already obliged ourselves to pay a little bit more for electricity in order to have it renewable. So it kind of doesn't matter if you again increase it by a very small amount. So in our case, it's only 0.2 cents per kilowatt hours. But on the other hand, considering that we are obviously as a city with our schools and everything, and lighting actually consuming a lot of energy, but it's only 0.2% per kilowatt hour. And this kind of is insignificant in the overall procurement price. And so we are actually able to get this decision from the council, and also it was no problem considering the general rule to stick to obligatory tasks. So it would have been much more difficult to say we dedicate 200,000 euros a year to renewable energy production, but this workaround was possible.
Okay, thanks. I think since I don't see more questions right now in the chat, I think it's a good time to take a 5-minute break before we go into the short interactive discussion part. So let's just say that I will see you here again at 10:30. See you in a second. Okay, hi everyone. It would be good to know if you're back already from the short coffee break.
Yes.
If some of you can give me a sign.
Yes. We are here.
You're here, perfect. Okay, yes, I see some people are giving me some reactions, so I think we can resume the webinar. I will start sharing again my screen, and I will give you a short introduction now to our interactive session with the breakout sessions. So basically, the breakout sessions, as I said, they want to encourage you to have a more interactive discussion in this online webinar meeting, and it's meant for you to have an opportunity to discuss amongst each other in a group of 10 people, more or less, and to stimulate a little bit your thinking about this financing model, about the consumer stock ownership plan, and whether it would be usable in your surroundings, whether it would be a sensible or a tool that would make sense in your city as well. So we have formulated 3 questions that you will discuss shortly with your companions in the group. First of all, do you have any ongoing or planned renewable energy projects in your city or your surroundings which could benefit from the CSOP financing approach? So basically, do you know of any projects where this would be possible to have this kind of financial inclusion of consumers? Then in your city or your surroundings, depending on what kind of stakeholder you are, do you know potential co-investors that could be part of the CSOP model? And this is also maybe a more general question. If you're not from a municipality or in direct contact with one, what could be obstacles in setting up the financing model in your opinion? So these 3 questions I would like to ask you to discuss now with some of our participants, and therefore I will break you into 5 different groups, and you will have about 10 minutes to discuss amongst each other, and then I will bring you back to the overall session, and I will come in and also see if everything's working out the way it should. And it would be nice maybe to have someone take some notes of what you're discussing. So just maybe open a Word document or a text editor and type in some notes, because they would be really interesting for us later to see what your thoughts are on this. So I'm starting now the interactive sessions. And you can see on your screen that you can now participate in these breakout sessions on your screen. Okay, some of you have not yet entered their sessions. Please do so if you're still here.
Municipalities, because the regulations here sometimes confused and contradictory, because municipalities are allowed to be part of a community, of course, but what a community is not regulated by the national law. There is a regional law which again says that municipalities.
Hello, everybody.
Hi.
Can you hear me, Marie?
Yes.
Hello, I'm sorry because I had the internet disconnection, so I don't know if is there anybody here with me?
We are now in the interactive breakout sessions. Wait, I will put you in one, okay?
Oh yeah, thank you.
Oh, can you not see on your screen?
I see just 8 participants.
Yes, wait a second, but now it should say enter breakout session or something.
No, that's a problem. Sorry. That's fine.
No.
I can wait here.
Yeah.
Don't worry.
We'll come back in like 5 minutes.
Yes. Okay. Okay. Thank you so much. Sorry. Thank you.
That's fine.
The group, it was not really a topic like discussing about CSOPs or prosumers, but well, CSOPs and prosumers is also a very new topic as we know, and maybe this would be a good group to share this idea with and see how they react.
Mm-hmm. Can you quickly mention, because I didn't get the name of this master plan initiative?
It's just called
the representatives of a municipality, of a local project, what are your plans, if any?
No, there are a lot of plans which we have already. Now, my organization or my town is here, Althengstedt, it's called. This is in Black Forest, in Germany, and the municipality is quite active here. We are currently working on a so-called integrated climate and energy plan. And what we have since over 15 years already financing story from a PV installation. There are 100 citizens owns this installation basically by their owners, yeah, so to speak. But in the moment, I think we target more that the municipality
Das waren jetzt gute 10 Minuten. Okay. Hi everyone, you should all be back now from the sessions. I see a lot of faces. Nice. I know you had, I hope you had some good discussions. No, 10 minutes is not very long. Maybe it gave you a first opportunity to speak a little bit more about what the CSIP could mean also locally in your municipalities or within your territories or within your jurisdictions. So thank you for participating. If someone of you took some notes, please feel free to share them with me via my email address. I will type this in the chat now. So I'd be happy to know a little bit more about what you discussed, but of course I will also ask my SCORE partners that were in the different sessions with you. And with this, I will now give the floor again to my colleague Kirsten Röber from Caritas. She will now present the second thematic block of this webinar that's more focused on the inclusion of vulnerable consumers in the financial energy transition. And yeah, enjoy the second part. Kirsten, the floor is yours.
Yes, so hello everyone. Welcome to the second part. I will now try to share my screen with you.
Perfect.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Oh no, that's sorry. Doesn't work.
We saw your screen.
Yeah, but there was a problem.
Yeah, now it looks good. All parts of it.
Okay. There's a problem of the control. Okay, now I can start. Sorry for this. Okay, just have to minimize. Okay. Okay. My talk is about the inclusion of vulnerable households in the energy transition. And I would like to deal in the following minutes with three main questions. Why inclusion? Why is it necessary to talk about it at all? What hinders inclusion? And how could we overcome these barriers? And let me first summarize some of the main and long-term benefits for consumers to participate in renewable energy projects. Firstly, there's this prospect of stable and low energy prices. Secondly, additional revenues through the sale of excess energy. Thirdly, the change in consumer behavior in terms of energy efficiency. Then the benefit of participating in a community, like the here presented CSOP model, or as we know from the energy cooperatives. Furthermore, there's the benefits of the current enabling framework by the EU member state, which supports citizens, for instance, by tax exemptions. And finally, ownership means also for some people
Kirsten, we cannot hear you anymore. Hello? No one can hear Kirsten right now, can they?
No, not really.
No,
I'm
can't.
She's not there anymore.
Oh no.
Hello?
Yeah, Kirsten,
Here she is.
we didn't hear you anymore.
Okay, yeah, my connection is very bad. Okay, but you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Huh?
If you like, I can also share my screen and you will guide us through it then, maybe.
Okay, so, but you can hear me now?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, so I continue.
But we cannot see your screen anymore.
Okay. Okay, then I go to, I switch the desk. 1 moment, please.
By the way, I saw in the chat that Ricardo Schreck posted some questions. I suggest that we will collect them until the end of the session and then answer this question for you, because it's not super detailed question about the CSOP, but just in general about financing.
Hello?
It's really interesting, but
Okay, it's actually a problem. Can you hear me now?
yes. Yeah.
Yes, well, why
You can't see my screen.
Why don't we use my suggestion, and she's sharing the screen and you go through it with us, Kirsten?
Yeah, we can do this. Just let me try again to, maybe it's just, oh my gosh, sorry. Okay, I think, yeah, then I would like to ask Marie to share my presentation.
Okay. You see it, right? We were here.
No, I don't see it. Okay, wait a moment.
We can see it, just to let you know.
Okay, I see it now as well. Okay, okay, okay. Then you have to click on. Next slide, please. Okay. Okay, I explained to you the typical investor in renewable energies, whereas other groups are underrepresented. Mostly these are vulnerable households, like low-income households, such as young families, long-term unemployed, single parents, women, the less well-educated, and young people. Next slide, please.
Yep.
Okay, no, okay. Just one click, if it's possible. Not all at the same time, but well, anyway. And this disparity is even more concerning, as vulnerable people are at a higher risk being affected by energy poverty. And let's have a look at the energy situation of low-income households. They mainly suffer from high energy expenditures, not because they generally consume more. In fact, it is quite the opposite, as we know from our own energy saving project. It is rather that the share of utility cost in relation to their low income is higher, which means they are much more burdened than middle income households. And furthermore, the dependence on rising and fluctuating energy prices by the bigger players and on the energy market. And finally, we see low energy efficiency by poorly insulated buildings and old appliances in the households. And this whole situation makes low-income households even more vulnerable. There is a higher risk of arrears of utility bills, the reduction in the use of energy services, heating, cooling, lighting, powering of appliances, and in its final stage, there are the power cuts. Click. And it is important to say that energy poverty is not only a matter of technical constraints and a loss of comfort. Energy poverty has a much deeper impact. It causes severe health issues and social isolation. And to conclude, it increases vulnerability even more. Click. According to the Energy Poverty Observatory, over 15 million people within the EU are affected by energy poverty, which means they can't afford an adequate level of energy consumption. Next slide, which leads us to the second question of my talk: what hinders inclusion? What prevents these people to participate in renewable energy, in particular when they could benefit the most from the advantages of renewable energies? And here we look again at the typical investor. What are the prerequisites to invest in renewable energy? Firstly, there is the need of money or savings. And due to the fact that this person can spare some money, it facilitates long-term economic planning and triggers a willingness to take risk. Secondly, this person has prior knowledge about the energy market, about renewable energies, and likely knows already about the option of ownership. Thirdly, he or she has the ability and time to process complex information, mostly given by those projects. And finally, this person has the means to seek expert support. And compared to these characteristics, we see quite the opposite when we look at the underrepresented groups. What are the possible barriers to inclusion? First of all, there is no low income or zero income and no savings and likely no social environment to borrow money. And due to this constantly high economic pressure, low income households have, let's say, a tendency to short-time planning and show risk-averse behavior. Secondly, there's little knowledge and experiences in energy efficiency and renewable energy so far. And thirdly, possibly there is lower education and a lack of self-confidence. And furthermore, as a result of our SCORE project, we have a structural barrier which we call the welfare dilemma. And it affects low-income households who are dependent on social benefits from the state, which on the one hand secure the minimum level of income. On the other hand, it doesn't allow the acquisition of assets and additional income from the dividends. And this means, as a consequence, participation would require the liquidation of assets and the reduction of social transfer, And you can surely imagine that this is not an option for many beneficiaries. So, how to overcome barriers to inclusion? There is on one hand the specific situation of vulnerable households, and on the other hand the option of renewable energy ownership and the prerequisites which the vulnerable households don't fulfill. So how can we bring them together? Can you click, please?
Sorry.
The answer is the inclusion can only happen if renewable energy projects adapt to the specific life situation of disadvantaged people and create the prerequisites to participate. And in the following, I like to present some approaches which we consider effective in this context. Creating suitable incentives. The reduction of financial barriers. Firstly, here we need to adjust the design of the renewable energy project, which means create low threshold investment options within a project, especially created for low-income households and their budget compared to other consumer investors. Likewise, create short amortization periods, and there's no guideline for this, but we can recommend less than 1 year. Secondly, creating additional financial incentives which have an immediate benefit for the participant by non-refundable public or philanthropic grants to subsidize individual members' contribution. And here we will later hear more about it when we come to the model of the assisted CSOP, which relies on grants and supports participants with zero income. And finally, back again. And there's also the free and partly subsidized energy saving devices like LEDs, but also fridges, as we know from our own program, which can be a tangible incentive which could trigger participation. Next, please. B, there's also the reduction of the structural barriers, which refers to the before mentioned welfare dilemma. And of course, this is not any longer on a project level. This is a question of political demands. It is the demand to change social legislation towards more financial flexibility. For instance, whether income exemptions are possible and up to what amount. And luckily, as we have heard before, there's a good time for it with regards to the new EU Renewable Energy Directive, RED II, which explicitly promotes the inclusion of vulnerable groups in renewable energies and requests its member states to provide an enabling framework for this. I can just very briefly point to the transposition paper which Professor Lovic is currently drafting with other partners, which summarizes these political demands. And there's another approach in this context of inclusion I want to present. I summarize it as the empowerment through know-how. And this assumes that through the communication of knowledge on energy efficiency, people learn how to change their consumption behavior in the household, which results ideally in the reduction of energy costs. But there's something else which is quite interesting. They have experienced unconsciously a certain level of self-efficacy which means, to put it briefly, they have learned to make a difference by themselves. There are, of course, as I think, many ways to achieve this. At this point, I'd like to point out two general approaches. Firstly, the collective empowerment. Here, vulnerable consumers can benefit from the social capital within renewable energy communities, which means that they can benefit, among others, from the exchange and transfer of knowledge within a group, or rather the community of co-investors. And in best case, referring to our CSOP, the professional support by an expert, a trustee. And possible incentives are, for instance, the participation in renewable energy communities without financial contribution. So unlike other co-investors, consumer co-investors, vulnerable participants would not invest, at least not at the beginning. And also we have the incentive of free trainings or advice by professionals on energy efficiency. And the most important incentive, of course, is the reduction of energy cost. And secondly, a click, please.
Yeah. Yep.
The individual empowerment. Here, the vulnerable consumers can benefit from an individualized energy saving advice or training in the household. And here I refer to our own model, the energy saving check, the Stromsparcheck, which could be an option to communicate know-how on how to save energy, and that people can, through this service, they can get this experience of self-efficacy. And this can create a basis for dealing with the option of co-ownership in renewable energy. And as we have heard, we have luckily in Essen the Diakonie, which provides this energy saving service, and we will follow this or pursue this approach in Essen, in the Essen pilot, when we approach low-income households. And finally, just briefly to the role of communication and framing towards more inclusion, encouraging through clear communication. Firstly, create proximity from an abstract model to a concrete project or building. And here, I think it's crucial to mention that the target group of vulnerable households should know the building well and ideally lives in one of them or uses them. And secondly, avoid complexity and simplify the model. It requires the reduction on the most relevant information for consumers while focusing on the main benefits. And thirdly, communicate face-to-face to create trust and use illustrative and easy to understand media presentation. And finally, communicate through intermediaries with high credibility among vulnerable households. This is a recommendation from our side when you consider starting a project in your municipality. Seek early organizations which have already the access to the vulnerable households, and this could accelerate the engagement process very much. And now I would like to conclude my talk and to stress that approaching vulnerable households or groups always demands a multi-layer approach, which means the here presented general strategies can't stand alone. For the success of the inclusion or empowerment of underrepresented groups, these strategies have to work together to be effective. Yeah, the intention of my talk was to give you an introduction on inclusion in the context of a fair energy transition, to show you the barriers and some ideas how to overcome them based on the experiences in SCORE. And yeah, it would be really great to hear if you have already made some experiences in this field, and probably you can contribute other ideas. If we have, at the end of the webinar, if you have still sufficient time, we can probably talk about it. Yeah, and now I would like to hand over to Professor Lovic, who will give you a further insight in the inclusion topic while presenting the assisted CSOP, which can be described as an adjusted model of the classical CSOP. Yeah, thank you for your attention.
Thanks, Kirsten. We have a question in the chat regarding the last slide with long-term benefits. I skipped through it, I guess. We lost it in translation. We will provide all the presentations to you so you can have a look at them again. Professor Lovic, when you share the screen, can I ask you to be quite brief in your presentation, because we'd like to have some time for questions and of course for Florian's presentation as well.
Okay, very well. Thank you very much, Marie. So you should see my screen now, do you?
Yes. We see.
It should be in full screen, is it?
Yep.
Okay, very well. So I'll try to be very brief and give you a quick overview of what we call here the assisted CSOP, which is a modification of the consumer stock ownership plan that I introduced earlier, in order to actually cope with the problems that Kirsten Röber has just outlined. And in order to do so, just a quick recap. So what is the challenge? So the challenge is that if we think about existing renewable energy projects, the picture usually is, as you see here on the left-hand side, that what I call here the average energy citizen, the Energiebürger, is usually exactly who is speaking to you now. So male, technical, affine, educated over 50 years or around 50 years, with a good income. And that also means at the same time that there are large groups of society which are entirely underrepresented, if at all present. And those are above all low-income households, for example, single parents, unemployed, working poor. Women are underrepresented as well, the less educated, and last but not least, of course, also young people. I will not go into any of the questions on the next slide about the structural obstacles that Kirsten has already laid out. I just want to point out that this problem of social transfers and the question whether people who receive social transfers can actually build up assets is not only a problem for the renewable energy sector, but it has been a problem of asset formation in general. So if you think about employee financial participation in Germany or in France or in many countries, you have policies to help employees to become co-owners of their companies. And over the last 40, 50 years, while these schemes have been implemented, the story was always the same. These policies actually help the middle class to become co-owners, and they leave behind those that, in our opinion, actually most urgently need to create assets, and those are really the ones at the bottom of society, so to say, the last 3 deciles of society. Now, how to solve this problem? We've also heard from Kirsten that there are 2 key elements in involving vulnerable consumers. One is that there should be some sort of consultancy, some sort of protection of these low-income households or these vulnerable consumers in terms of advice. And that's what I already mentioned is one of the elements of the CSOP in general, that is that it involves a trusteeship. But in our case, in the case of those that are really living at the margin of society, this isn't enough, because the main problem is that even the 250 euros that could be considered as the typical participation in a CSOP are a challenge for somebody who doesn't even have enough money to fill his fridge at the end of the month. So we are speaking about people who typically do not have any savings at all. And I want to illustrate this with a sample, with an example of a photovoltaic installation on a homeless shelter. So I'm picking here an example which is really rather extreme. So in this, in the example that you're seeing on the chart here, we have a homeless shelter, and the question is, how could we possibly involve the people who are living in this homeless shelter and make them co-owners? I will first quickly outline what the main challenges are here. One problem is, of course, that there's usually a fluctuation of residents. So unlike in a normal CSOP project where you would have residents in a residential building that live there for, let's say, 10 or 15 or 20 years, in this homeless shelter, people arrive and leave. And we had a first sub-pilot project where our experience was that the average time that homeless would spend in these shelters was around a year. Some of them stayed for 2 years, some of them were only there for 6 months. So that is one of the problems. How can we account for this fluctuation? The second problem is, of course, that these type of groups, be it homeless or be it people who are really drastically poor, don't even have the 250 euros, and that is really important because they are living under scarcity. This scarcity, this situation also affects their mindset. So they live from hand to mouth, and their time horizon, we would like to convince them of a CSOP project and say, look, in 6 or 7 years, the investment will be amortized. This will be completely abstract for them. So we need to make the effect of the project immediately tangible. So we have to try to create a scheme where they feel the effect at once and don't have to wait for, let's say, 6 or 7 years. And in our project here, in this idea, we have the homeless shelter, which is in the ownership. In this virtual, I mean, this is a fictional example. It is the city of Essen that where this whole scenario plays. We have a homeless shelter which is run by the charitable association HELP, and this the building where the homeless are living is a building owned by the city of Essen, which plans to build a PV installation on the rooftop. To mitigate the problem of the financing, in our case, we have a company, IKEA, I call it here. Obviously, you see the resemblance of the name because we had a similar project in Poland where IKEA Poland actually donated a PV installation for a charitable association. So we in the assisted CSOP, as one key element, we would have a donor that actually sponsors the installation. So there is no bank loan that has to be paid back. And of course, the installation is relatively small. It's a 30 kilowatt peak. It could be even smaller, for example, 10 kilowatt peak or so. And the idea is that our donor donates the photovoltaic installation, and that means that there is the question of the financial participation is not dependent on any financing in terms of bank loan. The idea again is that there is a trusteeship involved, and that actually our homeless, which are living in the homeless shelter, in this case 50 people, just for the sake of the calculation example, that they actually every month, each of these 50 homeless sets aside a little sum from his income, which is from social transfers, which would be roughly 10 euros per month. It could actually it's something somewhere about 8 euros in this example, which results in a 50 euro participation that the homeless have to contribute themselves. Then we have a matching contribution involved, which leverages this investment. So for each euro that the homeless save and invest into the project, they receive 2 euros of matching contribution, again, by a sponsor, in this case, the Kelso Institute. So together with their own savings of 2,500 euros over 6 installments, so the installments are relatively small, it's around 8 euros per month. Together with the matching contribution, the residents of the homeless shelter can come up with around 7,500 euros in this example, which would be around 25% of the photovoltaic installation. So they buy into the photovoltaic installation that is on the rooftop, and parallel to this investment, the CSOP is implementing energy efficiency measures. And the idea of this, there's a comment from Maria Trifonova, please, or a question? Okay, well, I think that might just been a mistake. So the idea is that the homeless, through the trusteeship, by 25%, they acquire 25% of the installation. And now as co-owners, the question is, how can we incentivize them to also save energy by switching off the light, being more careful about the electrical appliances in this shelter, although they, technically speaking, are not running it. And so we want to not only have them participate in the equity, in the investment, but we also want to have them participate in energy efficiency measures in the reduction of the consumption. So the idea is that once we have implemented energy efficiency measures and have increased the energy efficiency, in our example by 30%, which is from a previous project, that would result in around 500 euro energy savings for electricity each month, which of course the charitable association will benefit from. And the idea is that the charitable association, because they cannot make profits, will actually contribute these energy savings as a so-called dividend back to our homeless. So while the homeless for 6 months have to set aside 8 euros, resulting in the 50 euros overall investment, once they save energy and and reduce also the energy bill through the self-produced energy, there can be a small dividend paid to them, which 500 euros divided by 50 obviously already is a nice revenue which compensates for the contributions that they make over the 6 months. In other words, there are already from month 7 on concrete revenues for these homeless, so they have to wait for 6 months until they touch the first dividends of the project. Now, what is the mechanism that solves our second problem, and that is the problem that they actually usually, because they are recipients of social transfers, are not allowed to have cash income, and that is where our trusteeship comes in. So again, we have the city of Essen here that owns and builds the PV installation on the homeless shelter, because the building is owned by the city. We have the charitable association HELP, which manages this the building, and which of course is also responsible for paying the energy bills. So after our energy efficiency measures, we have lowered the electricity consumption, and we have our own production, which roughly reduces which roughly results in 50% of savings of the energy bill, and 50% of these savings are used to maintain the installation, and also are paid into a sinking fund, and 50% are actually paid out to our special fund for the CSOP participants as a so-called energy efficiency dividend. These funds are managed again either by the charitable association or by the city. This depends on who sets up the fund. So the idea is that actually the dividends doesn't go directly to our residents, but these dividends are paid into the special fund, and it is the trusteeship which can dispose over the funds. So in other words, our vulnerable consumers, in this case the homeless, don't receive any cash income. They do own a part of the PV installation, 25%, namely through the trusteeship, but because in the trusteeship agreement, there's a stipulation that hinders them from disposing of this ownership, so they can't sell it. They may benefit from the electricity production, but they can't sell it. And that means that in terms of social welfare legislation, they never actually have an inflow of cash or of capital income. So this shields the residents and prevents that the income that they can dispose of is set off against their social aid. So it is the special fund for the CSOP participants that accumulates the money, and it is the charitable association together with the trusteeship that decides of how to spend this money. And this could be, for example, a pair of new boots, a new computer for the shelter, maybe a little trip or any other type of expenditure, which then as an in-kind benefit would be the benefit for the residents. Last but not least,
yeah, yes. I think actually that we have to cut it here.
Okay, I'm sorry, I'm over the time. So you'll see on the last slide, the slides which will be distributed, you can see the idea of how the problem of fluctuation is solved. But I think I'll leave it here and give the floor back to Marie. What I just want to mention is that why do we do projects like this? And this is my last slide. It's a question of innovation. How does innovation take place? If you think of the discovery of antisepsis or anesthesia, it is actually striking that antisepsis, obviously today is common ground, took many years to have a breakthrough, while anesthesia spread very quickly. And this is what I call here the demonstrator effect. We need to make these kind of projects visible. And this is my last chart. Why was anesthesia so successful? Because before anesthesia, you would have to struggle with the patient, and after anesthesia, it was clear that the surgeon could operate without any problems on the patient. And this is what we need to do here also. We need to show that these things are possible, even if they are difficult. Thank you for the attention.
Thank you. Thank you all. So we only have very few minutes left, and we actually had a little more presentation prepared by our colleague Florian Hanke about also best practices of inclusion of vulnerable groups. And we will do this in a second, but before, in case you have to leave in 3 minutes, as was communicated before, there's just one slide that I want to show you, and then you're free to leave, but of course also welcome to stay for about 5 to 10 minutes more for the short presentation of my colleague Florian Hanke about best practices of financial inclusion of consumers. But last but not least, I would like to say thank you very much, all of you, for participating in our webinar. And if you found anything that we said interesting for your city, for your municipality, or for municipalities that you are in contact with, or just in general interesting, then we offer this cooperation with the SCORE project, which is called Follower Cities. The city of Essen, Calypsis mentioned it before. They started out as a follower city and have become now a pilot. But it's also possible for you to become follower cities, and we will receive, or you will receive from us, legal and technical support on how to implement a tailor-made CSOP in your local premises. Follower cities also receive support in engaging their local stakeholders and public to become active. This goes in the direction of what Kirsten said, so whom to contact and whom to take into account when you want to basically increase participation of consumers in your energy projects. if you like to do that, please come be in contact with me. We have a questionnaire which you can fill out so that we get to know your city a little bit more. And one final thing that we have a CSOP calculator on our homepage, SCORE homepage, where you can type in if you already have a planned renewable energy project in your city. You can plan in some data, and you can see if this would be viable with this CSOP financing technique. So thank you very much for participating. For those of you who have to leave already, we have a next event planned on Monday, 29th of June. It's a USEF Sustainable European Union Sustainable Energy Week event called Towards a Fair Energy Transition, enabling vulnerable consumers to take part in energy communities. So this session will focus a lot on energy poverty and energy communities, actually. And we have a lot of interesting people invited to speak with us. So feel free to join us again online for this webinar. You can get in touch via our homepage. You can write emails to me and to Kirsten. We will send around the presentations, and the recording will also be made available. And I thank everyone again for taking part, and for the ones who have to leave now, and for the ones who have 10 minutes more, we'd appreciate it if you would stay also to hear from Florian Hanke. Yes, whom I will give the floor to now. Thank you.
Thank you, Marie, and thank you for those that are staying. I'm just going to take 5 minutes following Kirsten's presentation, because she mentioned lots of different prerequisites and limitations and barriers for inclusion, and also possible ways to overcome these barriers. And what I'm going to do now is quickly talk about some existing examples. For example, a renewable energy community in Belgium, they are driving around to inform also vulnerable people about the possibilities that their cooperative offers. So local engagement is key. That is something that we're doing in our SCORE project as well. We're going out there informing vulnerable consumers, especially about the possibilities of co-ownership in a renewable energy project, something that is also, for example, done on the island of Gran Canaria, where an entire engagement campaign set off with video clips targeting also vulnerable consumers. The next thing, and that is something that we have been talking about during the entire webinar, that is setting the financial bar low. There are also some very inspiring good practice examples, very similar to what we are doing in our SCORE project. One example that I wanted to point out here is a wind park on a Danish island. Well, the name is Aro, but I'm not sure if I can pronounce it correctly. In this case, the project initiators wanted to realize 100% local ownership, and obviously, especially for low-income households, that is kind of difficult to achieve. So in this case, they cooperated with a local bank, which gave out low-interest loans to vulnerable consumers, households that could not secure any usual credit with collateral. So in this case, the local bank accepted their shares in this local wind project as collateral. A similar mechanism is used in our SCORE project as well. And in general, what I want to point out here is that especially local cooperative banks, if you work with them, they're usually very open to find similar schemes. So in this case, just a point towards low share prices and financing, which also realizes then the participation of low-income households, vulnerable households. Another very inspiring example comes from Belgium. In cooperation with, there are actually 3 different cooperatives working together. That is EcoPower, a big renewable energy cooperative in Belgium, Volterra, which is a small cooperative in the city of Eeklo and the city of Eeklo itself. So what they're doing here is that the city of Eeklo holds about 1/3 of the shares of the local renewable energy cooperative, and they turn those shares into what they call social shares. and give them out specifically to vulnerable and energy poor households in their community. And at the end, they don't have to pay for that share because the city owns those shares already, but they are still co-owners of that renewable energy community with all the benefits that come with it, lower energy prices, but also being part of a community, knowing and learning about energy and energy efficiency measures. So that is another good practice example that I wanted to point out here, especially when it comes to the role of local municipalities in this case, allowing also co-ownership of vulnerable people in renewable energy cooperatives in that case. And we are also working in the project of SCORE, we are also working with, we have talked, you have seen the talk of our local partner Essen, but also other partners that we're working with in Italy, for example. We're in close cooperation with municipalities. And then this is just another example from France that is a bit different. Here, Renewable Energy Cooperative offers to their members to donate a part of their energy bill to a special project to cross-fund measures that address energy poor households to help them overcome this very difficult situation of energy poverty. And then finally, something else that hasn't been mentioned yet, but that is also very promising, especially in renewable energy projects. GoParity is a crowdfunding platform that is based in Portugal, but that also offers campaigns across Europe. And also here you can find projects that specifically target vulnerable communities. And here we have different forms of how people from all over the world, in fact, can either donate or sponsor or invest in these kind of community projects to also allow the participation of vulnerable consumers and at the end maybe decrease the severity of energy poverty. Here are some more links to some more information that I just wanted to share with you, and at the end we will share all our presentations so that you can have a look at them, because now I had to be a bit in a rush. Thank you very much for your attention and for sticking with us a bit longer than was foreseen.
Thank you very much, Florian. That was great. Very interesting examples. Maybe we have some time for a few questions. We have one question in the chat for Mr. Lovic. How is the cost of administration and networking done by the trusteeship taken into account, especially in an assisted CSOP? Can you see where is Professor? You see it as well in the chat, right?
Shall I answer it once?
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. Certainly, and who was it who asked me?
Ricardo Schreck.
Yes, Ricardo.
In the chat.
Right. So obviously, this is a consideration. So it's about transaction costs, and this certainly depends on how large the project is. So if you stick to the example that I brought with the 50 homeless in the homeless shelter, certainly the trusteeship would most likely be a physical person. So we wouldn't set up an entity like a limited liability company or a trust, but it would be one person that would actually represent the symbolic, the small participation of the consumers, in our case, the homeless. And that means that in the ideal case, this is somebody of either of the municipality or somebody who runs the homeless shelter. So from the charitable association HELP. And in this model, the idea would be that the person is already employed by the charitable association, for example, the treasurer or somebody who does the financial administration, and that he or she would do this as voluntary work or as an additional task of his or her already set tasks. However, if projects become larger, and there's a larger group of consumers, and of course also there's a larger investment, and there are more complex energy efficiency measures, this would require somebody who cannot do this just on the side. And in this case, what we envisage would be either setting up an entity, for example, a limited liability company with a trustee who manages this entity and who would have to be paid, for example, as a side job, let's say 10 or 5 hours per week, depending on the complexity of the project. And certainly these costs have to be taken into account of the project. Is this sufficient as an answer? We can always continue the discussion after the seminar bilaterally. Other questions or comments? Maybe comments.
Yeah, I thought that this other question from Ricardo Schreck that he posted in the first place was very interesting, and I would like to get in an exchange on that. It's I think the second comment in the field.
Oh, which one was? Okay, let's see. Which one was that?
I think it refers to the workaround situations for municipalities that do not have extra budget for climate tasks, since climate is usually not a is not a mandatory task for municipalities. So the first question, but maybe it's difficult for us to answer this also because we are on a European level, because national legislation is different. If we're seeing a change in this becoming obligatory municipal task, climate change mitigation.
Maybe I could make one comment here.
Yes.
With regard to funding, because that's also the question. I mean, obligatory task, I think legislation is changing, and implementation of the Renewable Energy Directive and of other energy efficiency directives. I mean, there's a whole package of European legislation that needs to be implemented by the national legislature. And there are, of course, aspects that touch upon these issues. One that I want to mention here is the Just Transition Fund, which is a new source of funding. And the Just Transition Fund, as many of the structural funds, is actually explicitly geared to small-scale renewable energy projects. So municipalities will be able to receive funding from such kind of sources. And we are actually working on a paper that gives guidelines of how municipalities can receive funding from different funds. This is not only the Just Transition Fund, it's also, for example, the cohesion and the structural funds, the easy funds, but there may also be, after these funds are translated into regional programming, there may be regional programs, and one example would be Italy. In the Piedmont region, it's actually the regional government that has put up small grants for renewable energy communities to apply for such projects, although at the moment not with a focus on vulnerable consumers, but this is just a question of time that municipalities could actually, or regional authorities could actually implement such programs. So in the next half year, we will see this programming, and it's really important to inform the policymakers of these opportunities, and then of course also the municipalities, that they know that these funds are available.
Can I say something from the consumer point of view?
Of course, Monica. Dzień dobry.
Hello. I am from the consumer organization, and we are a partner in the project. And I would like to add that for everybody who would like to follow the project and who would like to help in this following, we can offer something. I mean, I can put the link to the other Horizon 2020 project, a STEP project, in which consumers, especially vulnerable consumers, have an access for the free of charge advising from the consumer organization. This advising cover energy efficiency, consumer and energy law, and of course CISO participation, and help in a contract agreement which a consumer should sign, and maybe sometimes consumers are afraid that it is not honest or cover unfair terms. So I will put the website address of the project, STEP project, and if you want, you can you can ask for the help in consumer advisors.
Perfect. Thank you, Monica, for the comment. That's very good to know. Of course, there are also other projects dealing with similar topics as well, and we work with them together. Any more comments? Yes, Frau Potthoff.
Yeah, I would like to comment on this assisted CSOP model, because what I like on that is, and what reminded me is, it reminded me to this project 50/50, which was developed in schools, where pupils in schools got 50% of the savings they achieved through energy saving measures. They got for free, for example, for a special holiday travel, or for other aspects of which were motivating them and supporting their changing behavior. And as far as I understood this model with this help organization, this is a little similar, that the help organization gets money for, in this case, homeless people, to support them or to motivate them to be part of this project, and also to motivate them on energy saving behavior. And maybe that is a track how we can or how you can develop this model of CSOP, which is, in a way, sometimes it feels for me a little too complicated, and so that also other organizations can jump on it, so to say. But with this idea of motivating this target group of low-income households for their energy saving behavior, maybe that could be a direction to work on, or just as a comment. Because I know from Caritas organization, for example, that they are also trying to fund special offerings to these households, like homeless people, for example, giving their opportunities for having a holiday day together, or doing little travels or things like that. And maybe that is an idea more to, as I said, to look into deeper.
Yes, thank you for this perspective. Do we have any more questions? Otherwise, I would resume the webinar soon, because we have taken already quite some time of yours. I see none. Then I say thank you again. Please be in contact if you're interested in becoming a follower city, or if you're interested in hearing more about us. And thanks again. Have a really good day today, and maybe see you on our European Sustainable Energy Week panel session on Monday in 2 weeks. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Goodbye.
Goodbye, thanks.
Thank you.
Goodbye.
Goodbye.